They say choosing yourself, especially after 60, is selfish. Well then, I guess it's time to become gloriously, unapologetically selfish. Because if sacrificing your joy, your knees, and your last working nerve for everyone else hasn't bought you peace yet, what exactly are you waiting for? A coupon? Hi there, and welcome, truly, to a new video from Buddhist Wisdom for the Elderly, where we mix incense and irreverence like a monk with a bad sense of humor and a spine full of karma. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a lie we've all swallowed. That being good means disappearing. That being liked is more important than being real. But here's the truth, dear one. When you finally choose yourself, people will get uncomfortable, and that's when your freedom begins. Stick around because in each part of this video we'll walk you through the belief you've been living by, why it quietly wrecks your soul, the very real story of someone who escaped it, and what it looks like to speak your truth without burning the village down. And don't miss part 5. It's the gut punch that explains why choosing yourself can feel like grief. Not because you're broken, but because you're finally burying the masks you wore to survive. So like, subscribe, and help us reach 1,000 beautiful souls who are done pretending. You'll be giving us the motivation and the karmic shove to keep creating videos that actually get you. Let's begin. But first, take off the mask. We won't need it where we're going. Part 1. You weren't living, you were auditioning. Let's be honest, most of us didn't live our lives. We performed them. Like actors in a never-ending school play, we had our roles handed to us somewhere between our first heartbreak and our first back pain. And we played them well. You were the good daughter, the devoted husband, the neighbor who watered plants and never complained when someone parked too close to the driveway. You became the person people liked having around, not because they knew you, but because you never made anyone uncomfortable. You knew how to shrink just enough to fit into every room without causing a scene. And somewhere in there, you forgot who you actually were. You forgot the parts of you that didn't make sense to other people. The parts that were loud, opinionated, wild, spiritual, sexy, lazy, creative, quiet, angry, playful. You traded your essence for approval. You wore a smile like it was spiritual armor, but underneath you were exhausted. And you know what's funny? Most people loved that version of you. The one who said yes, even when your soul screamed hell no. The one who went to events you hated, who babysat out of guilt, who agreed to holidays you dreaded, who answered the phone at 10 p.m. just to be polite. But here's the secret they don't want you to know. They didn't love you. They loved your performance. And the worst part? You applauded yourself for it. You thought being selfless made you holy. That disappearing was some kind of virtue. That being liked was the same as being loved. It's not. Buddhism says the self is an illusion. But oh, how we polish that illusion like it's a trophy. We feed it, decorate it, defend it, and the whole time we think we're being good. But good is just another costume. And costumes get itchy after 60. Let me tell you a story. There was a woman I once knew, let's call her Mildred. Mildred was what you'd call salt of the earth. She made pies for the neighbors. She remembered every birthday. She even laughed at jokes that made her wince. Then one day, around age 72, Mildred walked into her kitchen, looked at her fridge covered in pictures of other people's kids, and said out loud, "I don't know who the hell any of you are." She meant it literally and spiritually. So she did something wild. She took every magnet down, she baked one last pie, and then she bought a motorcycle. Now, I'm not saying you need to get leather pants and join a biker gang called the Awakened Ones, but I am saying that it's okay to retire your performance. You've already earned the applause. Now it's time for intermission. The thing about aging, and no one tells you this, is that it gives you the permission slip you've been waiting for your whole life. The one that says, you can stop now, you can be you. But it's terrifying at first, because if you stop performing, who's left? What if the real you is disappointing? What if the real you is boring? What if the real you just wants to sit under a tree, sip tea, and talk to frogs? Then so be it. Buddhist teachings remind us, the lotus blooms not in clean water, but in muck. That muck? It's your unspoken resentment, your uncried tears, your suppressed rage, your desire to finally eat pancakes in bed at noon without explaining yourself. That's where your real life is hiding, in the parts you've been taught to cover up. And let's be honest, the show's over. The kids are grown, the boss is retired, your ex is either remarried, Reiki certified, or blocked on Facebook. You have nothing left to prove. So if today is the day you walk off that stage and stop auditioning for love, for belonging, for spiritual approval, then welcome. You're not late, you're right on time, and we saved you a seat in the front row of your own damn life. Part 2. Your boundaries will offend the people who benefited from your lack of them. You know you're onto something spiritually powerful when people start calling you difficult. There's a moment in this journey, not at the beginning, not quite at the middle, where you finally start saying no. Not in a dramatic way, not with a megaphone, just calmly, lovingly, unapologetically. No, I'm not coming to Thanksgiving this year. No, I don't want to join the Zoom prayer group. No, I don't feel like babysitting your devil children, Karen. At first, it feels like liberation. You exhale, unclench your jaw, feel your spine unfurl like a flag of truth. It's delicious. But then, the reactions start. People look at you like you've betrayed them. They frown, squint, tilt their heads. You've changed, they whisper, like you've joined a motorcycle gang and started sacrificing chickens under a full moon. They say things like, "You never used to be like this. You used to be so kind. What happened to you?" Let me translate that for you. I'm uncomfortable that you've stopped being convenient. Here's the Buddhist part no one likes. Boundaries are an act of compassion, not just for you, but for them. Because every time you say yes from guilt, you teach someone to ignore your soul. Every time you betray your own need for peace to keep the room calm, you teach the world that your spirit is optional. And that's not noble. That's spiritual codependence. Now let's talk about how this hits especially hard in older age. Because if you're over 65, chances are high that you've been everyone's caretaker, emotional sponge, therapist, unpaid nanny, guilt dumpster, and emergency contact since you had knees that worked. You've played the role for so long that people stopped asking if you're even okay. You became a resource, not a person. But here's the good news. The moment you say no for the first time, really mean it, you reclaim your humanity. And let me be clear, this will absolutely piss some people off. You'll disappoint your adult children, you'll confuse your sister, your neighbor might stop bringing over soup. Some people will talk behind your back, which is hilarious because they were already doing that. You just weren't invited to the gossip. But what happens next is holy. The ones who stay are the ones who actually love you. Not your utility, not your people-pleasing, not your emotional labor. You. One woman I met, we'll call her Teresa, was 79 when she finally started saying no. She told her family she wouldn't be hosting Christmas anymore. Just like that. They were furious. They guilt-tripped her, begged her, made her feel like she was breaking the bloodline or something. But you always do it, they said. It's tradition. You know what she did? She booked a cabin in the mountains, took a puzzle, left her phone at home, and for the first time in 40 years, she had a silent Christmas. She told me later, it was the first time I met myself at the holidays. That's the power of boundaries. Buddhism teaches us about right action, not just doing things, but doing them from clarity, not compulsion. And setting a boundary is right action with teeth. But here's the warning. When you start protecting your peace, the people who fed off your peace will throw tantrums. That's okay. You don't owe anyone access to you just because they've always had it. Think of your energy like your home. You wouldn't let someone walk in, rearrange the furniture, track mud through the carpet, eat your cookies, and then criticize your wallpaper. So why do we do it emotionally? Set the damn boundary. Lock the door. Eat your cookies. And if they really love you, they'll knock next time, they'll ask, they'll respect your space. And if they don't, good. Now you know. You are not selfish, you are not rude, you are not ungrateful, you're just finally in alignment with your own spirit. And sometimes that spirit says, not today. I'm tired. I matter. So if they're offended, let them be offended. You've spent your whole life making other people comfortable. It's your turn. Part 3. Solitude isn't loneliness. It's the universe finally shutting up so you can hear yourself think. So you've done it. You finally stopped saying yes to everything. You stopped rearranging your life around people who think boundaries are a personality flaw. You canceled the potluck. You left the church group text. You told your son you wouldn't be watching the dog this weekend because you're busy, doing nothing. And now you sit alone. Cue the dramatic music. At first, it's kind of beautiful. The house is quiet, your phone's not buzzing, no one's asking you to explain yourself or microwave anything for them. You breathe in, you breathe out, you sip your tea, you feel peaceful. For 5 minutes. Then it hits you. Is this it? Is this who I am now? A slightly aging Buddha on a couch surrounded by decorative pillows and unspoken grief? Let's pause here. What you're experiencing is not loneliness. It's withdrawal from the drug of being needed. See, when you spend most of your life overgiving, performing, hosting, fixing, helping, and holding everyone else's emotions like you're some kind of unpaid therapist slash bartender slash healing oracle, you develop a dependency on it. You confuse chaos with connection. You think noise equals love. So when the noise stops, it doesn't feel like peace at first. It feels like a death. And in a way, it is. It's the death of the old you, the version that only existed through the eyes of others. And now that she's gone, who's left? Just you. But here's where it gets juicy, because that's the exact moment Buddhism smiles and hands you a broom. This silence, it's not a void, it's a garden. You just haven't planted anything in it yet. Solitude, according to Buddhist teachings, is not a punishment. It's the first condition for awakening. Think about it. The Buddha didn't find enlightenment by networking at a wellness retreat. He sat under a tree, alone, for a very long time. But we've been trained to fear that kind of stillness, because when we're still, we hear things we've buried. I never really loved him. I miss painting. I'm tired of pretending. I wish I had danced more. These voices are not demons. They're your truth. And they've been waiting years for the house to get quiet enough so they could finally speak. Now look, I'm not romanticizing loneliness. It's real, especially in older age. Friends pass, family drifts, you attend more funerals than weddings, there's grief, there's absence, there's dust on the phone. But here's the twist, that space isn't empty, it's yours. Let me tell you about Harold. Harold was 81 when his wife passed. They'd been married since Eisenhower was in office. For months, he sat in his living room, TV on, volume loud, just to fill the silence. He said the emptiness made his ears ring. Then one day, the power went out. No TV, no background noise, just Harold and the hum of his refrigerator. That day, he sat there in the quiet. He watched the rain, he made himself tea. And without meaning to, he said out loud, "Well, hello." That hello was to himself. 2 years later, Harold writes poetry. Bad poetry, beautiful poetry. He reads it at the local library and he still misses his wife every day. But now he says, "I finally met the man she loved." That's solitude, not isolation. Reunion. Solitude is where the soul gets to breathe without performing. It's where old passions wake up like sleepy dogs, stretch their legs and say, "You ready to try again?" It's where you remember who you were before you became everyone's everything. Buddhism calls this returning to your original face. It doesn't mean becoming young again. It means becoming real again. And here's the funny thing. Once you stop fearing solitude, it becomes intoxicating. You crave it. You start rescheduling things just to be alone. You realize you're not lonely at all. You're just finally free of the noise that convinced you being alone meant being unloved. Let me say that again for the elders in the back. Being alone does not mean you are unloved. It means you are unavailable for drama, guilt, manipulation, and emotional blackmail wrapped in family photos. So if you're sitting in silence today, good. That means you've made it past the detox. Now the real work begins, because in that silence, there's a door. It doesn't look like much. Just a simple wooden thing, no lock, no instructions. But behind it, that's where the real you lives. And she's been waiting a very, very long time. Part 4, synchronicity happens, but only after the nervous breakdown. Let's talk about something most spiritual folks love to romanticize: synchronicity. You know, those perfectly timed moments that feel like the universe finally remembered you exist? Like when you're thinking of someone and they call, or when you walk into a bookstore and a book practically jumps off the shelf and smacks you in the third eye. Or when you finally say no to that family trip you always hated, and suddenly your joints stop hurting. People love to talk about those moments like they just arrive. Like they float into your life on a lotus flower while pan flutes play softly in the background. But let me tell you something a bit more honest, a bit more Buddhist. Synchronicity doesn't happen until after the existential faceplant. Before the magic, there's usually a complete spiritual nervous breakdown in aisle 7 of your local grocery store. You cry into your cereal, you forget how to use your phone. You start journaling and accidentally write your ex's name 17 times, followed by, "Why did I pretend I was okay with camping?" Yeah, that kind of breakdown. Because see, the universe doesn't send signs to the version of you who's still faking it. It waits, it watches, and when it sees you finally crumble in just the right way, not defeated, but emptied, then it sends the signs. But it has a dark sense of humor. Think of the universe like a Zen monk with a fly swatter. Helpful, but a little chaotic. Let me tell you about Earl. Earl is 76. Bald. Kind eyes. He spent most of his life working in insurance, making everyone else's emergencies his business. After retirement, he got lost. Not metaphorically. He literally got lost trying to drive to the grocery store. Ended up in a tiny strip mall on the wrong side of town. Walked into the wrong door. Turns out it was an art class. But instead of walking back out, something stopped him. The smell of paint, the sound of jazz, the gentle hum of old people quietly reclaiming their joy. He stayed. He painted. Terribly at first. Then something opened up. He found himself painting every week. He started laughing again. He bought a ridiculous hat, the kind that says, "I don't care what anyone thinks of me." Eventually, he even met someone, a retired ballet teacher named Lois, with wild opinions and a soft laugh. None of it was planned. All of it was perfect. And it didn't begin with clarity. It began with getting completely, totally lost. That's synchronicity. Buddhism has a word for this kind of cosmic choreography: karma. Not the spooky, you did bad things so now you'll stub your toe kind. Karma in its purest form is the law of causes and conditions. When you start living in alignment with your truth, when your thoughts, speech, and actions come from a place of real presence, the world responds. But it's slow, it's quiet, and sometimes it shows up looking like a mistake. That's the trick. Most people miss synchronicity because they're looking for neon signs. But the signs don't glow, they whisper. Like the woman you meet at the pharmacy who casually mentions a book that changes your life. Or the neighbor's dog that barks at 2 a.m. and forces you to go outside, just in time to see the moon in full glory and realize, I'm still alive. Or the feeling you get, out of nowhere, that it's finally time to forgive someone, not because they deserve it, but because you do. Synchronicity isn't magic, it's coherence. It's what happens when your insides match your outsides. But let me warn you again, before coherence comes collapse. The part where you fall apart is not the end. It's the invitation. So don't be afraid if things start going wrong when you choose yourself. Your car breaks down. Your oldest friend stops calling. You lose interest in everything that used to distract you. Good, let it fall. You're not being punished. You're being cleared. Cleared for alignment. Cleared for the moments that don't make sense until they do. Cleared for the kind of peace that doesn't look dramatic, but feels like coming home. So the next time something strange happens, something small, quiet, oddly perfect, don't dismiss it. That's the universe winking at you. That's the universe saying, finally, you're paying attention. Part 5. Choosing yourself might feel like grief because it is. No one warns you that choosing yourself might feel like death. Not a physical one. Not the lights out say goodbye kind. I mean the death of all the fake selves you built to survive. The woman who never raised her voice, even when she should have screamed. The man who always picked up the check, even when he was drowning in debt. The friend who agreed with everything because conflict made her soul shrink. The daughter who never said no because she thought love meant obedience. You don't just shed these identities, you grieve them, because even though they were false, they were yours. And they worked, at least for a while. They helped you get through marriages, jobs, holidays, awkward dinners, awkward decades. They earned you praise, silence, maybe even a few casseroles. But now you've outgrown them. And when you start letting them go, something in your chest cracks open. You might cry, you might get angry at the version of you that stayed too long, said too little, loved too small. You might look in the mirror and whisper, "I'm sorry," to a younger version of yourself who had no idea how to say no without shaking. That's grief. It's not just for funerals, it's for identities too. Buddhism calls this anicca, impermanence. Everything changes. Everything ends. Even your ego. Especially your ego. But here's the cosmic joke. Your ego will fight to stay alive, even when it's making you miserable. It'll throw tantrums. It'll bargain. It'll say things like, maybe just one more favor. Maybe don't speak your truth today. Maybe they'll love you again if you go back to being smaller. Don't listen, because grief is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that something sacred is ending, and something more sacred is beginning. Let me tell you about Shirley. Shirley was a Sunday school teacher for 42 years. Everyone in town called her the sweet one. Always smiling, always baking, always quoting the Bible even when no one asked. But after her husband passed, something inside her snapped. She said she couldn't pray the same way anymore. Couldn't smile through everything like she used to. Couldn't keep being the sweet one. So what did she do? She started cursing. Not aggressively, just honestly. "I'm too damn old to lie about how I feel," she said. She stopped baking, started painting, found a yoga class for seniors that ended in wine. She even started going by her middle name, Ruth, because Shirley was someone I made up to survive church politics. And every time someone said, "You've changed," she smiled and replied, "I've died, actually. Several times." Ruth didn't need a funeral, but her performance did. That's the thing about choosing yourself. It's not a glow-up. It's a graveyard. You bury who you were pretending to be. You mourn what you missed while you were too busy being agreeable. You say goodbye to the parts of you that once fit, like old shoes that helped you walk when you couldn't run. And then you bless them, thank them, and let them rot. Because that's how compost works. And you, my dear, are a garden now. From those funerals, something fresh begins to grow. You laugh a little differently. You walk a little slower. You enjoy your own company more than you thought possible. You become quietly dangerous, not in a start a bar fight kind of way, in a they can't guilt me anymore kind of way. You become the kind of person who no longer needs to be understood in every room, the kind of person who no longer over-explains, the kind of person who, when asked to do something that doesn't feel right, simply says, "No thanks," and keeps sipping tea like nothing happened. Because Nothing did happen. You're just not dead inside anymore. So if you're crying more lately, if you're tired, emotional, nostalgic, confused, good. You're not breaking down. You're breaking up with the person you never really were. Part 6. When you stop performing, you might realize you're kind of boring. So you've burned the costumes, you've buried your past selves. You're no longer anyone's emotional air freshener. Congratulations. Now you're sitting on your couch, fully authentic and slightly bored. No one tells you this part because it doesn't sound spiritual or sexy. But once you stop performing, stop pleasing, stop being the go-to person for other people's chaos, you might look around and think, well, crap, who even am I without all the drama? Let's talk about this awkward spiritual side effect. Post-performance boredom. See, for decades, your nervous system has been doing cartwheels just to keep the peace. You've been managing birthdays, breakups, work crises, in-law mounds, community center meetings, family feuds, and your sister's gluten-free tantrums. You were booked, busy, emotionally overdrawn, but it gave your life rhythm, urgency, identity. Now, you wake up and it's just you. And the tea tastes like silence. Buddhism calls this the emptiness between identities, the space between the roles we drop and the peace we haven't quite embraced yet. It's sacred, but it can also feel like a Tuesday afternoon with nothing to do and no one to pretend for. Let me tell you about Marjorie. Marjorie retired from 38 years of teaching third grade. She was beloved, had 1,000 thank you cards and a drawer full of mug gifts to prove it. She thought once she retired, she'd feel free. Instead, she felt irrelevant. She cleaned the house, organized her garage, alphabetized her spices, watched 4 seasons of British crime dramas, and still felt itchy inside. Then one day, she went to the park. No reason, just needed air. She sat down on a bench, watched a squirrel for 45 minutes. That squirrel changed her life. Because for the first time in decades, Marjorie realized she didn't have to be useful to be valuable. She didn't have to inspire, lead, or fix anyone. She could just sit, watch, exist. She went home and wrote in her journal, maybe being boring is actually just being at peace. Let that sink in. We confuse constant stimulation with meaning, but being overstimulated isn't meaningful. It's just exhausting. When you stop performing, you might find out you don't have many hobbies, just habits. You've never actually sat with yourself for more than 5 minutes without reaching for a distraction. You're not sure what you like, only what others have needed you to be. And that's okay, that's not a crisis, that's the reset. Boredom is the compost of the soul. It's where old desires rot into new seeds. But first, you have to sit in it. Here's where the spiritual comedy kicks in. You might think, okay, let's become a new version of me. And you sign up for salsa dancing, or stained glass, or goat yoga. And you hate it. Good, that means you're trying again. Failing forward. Dating your soul like it's the first time. And just like actual dating, there will be bad fits, awkward silences, and moments where you pretend to like something because there were snacks. Eventually, something clicks. You'll find yourself doing a puzzle, or watering a plant, or walking around the block humming for no reason. And you'll realize, this feels like me. Not the exciting me, not the impressive me, just me. Buddhist wisdom tells us that the self is a constantly changing illusion, but you still get to decide which illusions feel most aligned with your truth. You get to be the kind of person who paints badly, walks slowly, talks to birds, writes poems about pears, takes naps at odd hours, enjoys being mildly, beautifully unremarkable. Because life isn't about being interesting, it's about being interested. Interested in your own thoughts. Interested in how shadows hit the wall at 4:30 p.m. Interested in how tea tastes when no one's watching. And here's the final twist. Once you embrace being boring, people start calling you mysterious. You're calm, you're unbothered, you don't gossip, you don't compete. You just radiate a kind of grounded silence that makes others feel like they need to get their lives together. That's the power of peace. It looks boring from the outside, but inside, it's electric. So if you find yourself yawning through this phase, unsure what you're doing, doubting whether your life has meaning now that you're not performing, good. That means you're finally living. Quietly, slowly, honestly, and yes, maybe a little bit boring, blessed be. Part 7. You don't need to be better, you just need to be real. After all the identity funerals, the awkward silence, the quiet revelations over lukewarm tea, you arrive at this weird place in your life where no one claps anymore. And you don't care. You're no longer interested in gold stars, applause, or being labeled an inspiration by people who just want to feel better about their own avoidance. You're not striving to be the best version of yourself anymore. You just want to be the realest version. And here's the Buddhist punchline. That was the whole point all along. Spiritual awakening isn't a makeover montage. You don't emerge from it with a robe, glowing skin, and a fresh career as a meditation coach. Most days, you just wake up, make toast, and quietly don't betray yourself. That's the win. Not the big transformation, but the small refusals. Refusing to lie to be liked. Refusing to shrink to keep the peace. Refusing to rush through your own becoming because someone else is uncomfortable with your silence. You're not a brand. You're not a bucket list. You're not a product to be improved upon every year like some sad little phone software update. You're a soul, messy, tender, wise in ways no one sees, because most of your wisdom came from pain you never talked about. You don't owe anyone an explanation for the peace you found. You don't need to post about your breakthroughs. You don't need to inspire your cousin Cheryl or prove to your adult kids that your solitude is intentional. You don't need to read 47 books on healing just to earn permission to rest. Rest is the healing. Being boring is the healing. Letting people down is the healing. Laughing at your old self without judgment is the healing. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're just back. Back to the you that existed before the world named you helpful, attractive, successful, spiritual, or whatever nonsense got pinned to your forehead before you even had your first wrinkle. There's a Buddhist parable of a monk who walked across a desert with only one possession, a cracked bowl. One day the bowl finally shattered, and the monk sat down and laughed for an hour. That bowl was never him. And neither is the personality you spent 50 years perfecting just to survive. Let it break. Let them talk. Let the performance end. The stage was never real. Your worth isn't in what you do, fix, or offer others. It's in your presence. In the way your silence feels like permission. In the way your no comes with a smile instead of a 10-minute apology. In the way you hum in the kitchen now, not because anyone's listening, but because you finally feel like singing. You are not here to be consumed. You are here to be. There's no final chapter where everything makes sense. Just quiet mornings, old aches, new joys, a strange appreciation for the way shadows move across the carpet, a gratitude that no longer needs to be spoken. So stop trying to improve yourself like a home renovation project with a deadline. There is no finish line. There is only now. So, what have we really done here today? We buried a few outdated versions of ourselves, sat in silence long enough to hear the furniture creak back, realized we're not broken, we're just a little overdue for soul maintenance. Maybe you laughed, maybe you cried, maybe you paused halfway through to make tea and ended up having a full conversation with your houseplants. All signs of spiritual progress. We talked about what happens when you finally choose yourself. The discomfort, the grief, the silence that feels like punishment until it starts to feel like peace. We told the stories of real people who got lost and accidentally found themselves at art classes, on park benches, and in their own damn skin for the first time. And if you remember one thing, let it be this. You don't need to be better. You just need to be real. Now, if something in this video whispered to your heart or shouted at your spine, help us keep this little corner of the internet alive and weird. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment below about which version of yourself you're finally ready to bury. We'll bring the shovel, you bring the snacks. This is Buddhist wisdom for the elderly, where the tea is hot, the truth is soft, and the path to enlightenment sometimes looks like napping in your favorite chair. Thanks for watching. Now go sit in the silence. It's been waiting for you.